My Dream by Leo Tolstoy, continued. During the last year, Lisa had without doubt lived through more than in all the preceding 25. Suddenly she had realized the emptiness of her whole life. It rose before her, base and sordid. This life at home and among the rich set in St. Petersburg. Yes, this animal existence that never sounded the depths but only touched the shallows of life. It was well enough for a year or two, or perhaps even 3, but when it went on for 7 or 8 years with its parties, balls, concerts, and suppers, with its costumes and coiffures to display the charms of the body, with its adorers, old and young, all alike seemingly possessed of some unaccountable right to have everything, to laugh at everything, and with its summer months spent in the same way, everything yielding but a superficial pleasure, even music and reading merely touching upon life's problems but never solving them, all this holding out no promise of change, and losing its charm more and more, she began to despair. She had desperate moods when she longed to die. Her friends directed her thoughts to charity. On the one hand she saw poverty, which was real and repulsive, and a sham poverty even more repulsive and pitiable. On the other, she saw the terrible indifference of the lady patronesses, who came in carriages and gowns worth thousands. Life became to her more and more unbearable. She yearned for something real, for life itself, not this playing at living, not this skimming life of its cream. Of real life there was none. The best of her memories was her love for the little cadet Coco. That had been a good, honest, straightforward impulse, and now there was nothing like it. There could not be. She grew more and more depressed, and in this gloomy mood she went to visit an aunt in Finland. The fresh scenery and surroundings, the people strangely different to her own, appealed to her at any rate as a new experience. How and when it all began she could not clearly remember. Her aunt had another guest, a Swede. He talked of his work, his people, the latest Swedish novel. Somehow she herself did not know how that terrible fascination of glances and smiles began, the meaning of which cannot be put into words. These smiles and glances seemed to reveal to each not only the soul of the other, but some vital and universal mystery. Every word they spoke was invested by these smiles with a profound and wonderful significance. Music, too, when they were listening together, or when they sang duets, became full of the same deep meaning. So also the words in the books they read aloud. Sometimes they would argue, but the moment their eyes met, or a smile flashed between them, the discussion remained far behind. They soared beyond it to some higher plane, consecrated to themselves. How it had come about, how and when the devil who had seized hold of them both first appeared behind these smiles and glances, she could not say, but when terror first seized her, the invisible threads that bound them were already so interwoven that she had no power to tear herself free. She could only count on him and on his honor. She hoped that he would not make use of this power, yet all the while she vaguely desired it. Her weakness was the greater because she had nothing to support her in the struggle. She was weary of society life, and she had no affection for her mother. Her father, so she thought, had cast her away from him, and she longed passionately to live and to have done with play. Love, the perfect love of a woman for a man, held the promise of life for her. Her strong, passionate nature, too, was dragging her thither. In the tall, strong figure of this man, with his fair hair and light upturned moustache, under which shone a smile attractive and compelling, she saw the promise of that life for which she longed. and then the smiles and glances, the hope of something so incredibly beautiful led, as they were bound to lead, to that which she feared but unconsciously awaited. Suddenly, all that was beautiful, joyous, spiritual, and full of promise for the future became animal and sordid, sad and despairing. She looked into his eyes and tried to smile, pretending that she feared nothing, that everything was as it should be. But deep down in her soul she knew it was all over. She understood that she had not found in him what she had sought, that which she had once known in herself and in Coco. She told him that he must write to her father, asking her hand in marriage. This he promised to do. But when she met him the next day, he said it was impossible for him to write just then. She saw something vague and furtive in his eyes, and her distrust of him grew. The following day he wrote to her, telling her that he was already married, though his wife had left him long since, that he knew she would despise him for the wrong he had done her, and implored her forgiveness. She made him come to see her. Said she loved him, that she felt herself bound to him forever, whether he was married or not, and would never leave him. The next time they met, he told her that he and his parents were so poor that he could only offer her the meanest existence. She answered that she needed nothing, and was ready to go with him at once wherever he wished. He endeavoured to dissuade her, advising her to wait, and so she waited, but to live on with this secret, with occasional meetings, and merely corresponding with him, all hidden from her family, was agonizing, and she insisted again that he must take her away. At first, when she returned to St. Petersburg, he wrote promising to come, and then letters ceased, and she knew no more of him. She tried to lead her old life, but it was impossible. She felt ill, and the efforts of the doctors were unavailing. In her hopelessness, she resolved to kill herself. But how was she to do this, so that her death might seem natural? She really desired to take her life, and imagined that she had irrevocably decided on the step. So, obtaining some poison, she poured it into a glass, and in another instant would have drunk it, had not her sister's little son of 5 at that very moment run in to show her a toy his grandmother had given him. She caressed the child, and suddenly stopping short, burst into tears. The thought overpowered her that she, too, might have been a mother, had he not been married, and this vision of motherhood made her look into her own soul for the first time. She began to think not of what others would say of her, but of her own life. To kill oneself because of what the world might say was easy, but the moment she saw her own life dissociated from the world, to take that life was out of the question. She threw away the poison and ceased to think of suicide. Then her life within began. It was real life, and despite the torture of it, had the possibility been given her, she would not have turned back from it. She began to pray, but there was no comfort in prayer, and her suffering was less for herself than for her father, whose grief she foresaw and understood. Thus months dragged along, and then something happened which entirely transformed her life. One day, when she was at work upon a quilt, she suddenly experienced a strange sensation. No, it seemed impossible. Motionless, she sat with her work in hand. Was it possible that this was it? Forgetting everything, his baseness and deceit, her mother's querulousness, and her father's sorrow, she smiled, she shuddered at the recollection that she was on the point of killing it, together with herself. She now directed all her thoughts to getting away, somewhere where she could bear her child, and become a miserable, pitiful mother, but a mother withal. Somehow she planned and arranged it all, leaving her home and settling in a distant provincial town where no one could find her and where she thought she would be far from her people. But unfortunately her father's brother received an appointment there, a thing she could not possibly foresee. For 4 months she had been living in the house of a midwife, one Maria Ivanovna, and on learning that her uncle had come to the town, she was preparing to fly to a still remoter hiding place.